I guess I'll just start with a brief intro that again, I'm Akilah S. Richards. I'm an unschooling organizer. My daughters are 17 and 15, and they were very much our catalyst into looking at schooling outside of the regular convention. And I'll just leave it there for now and let Zakiyya do any bit of brief intro that you might want to do, sis.
Hi, thanks, Akilah. And hello, everybody. Yeah, I'm Zakiyya Ismail. I am based here in Johannesburg, in South Africa. And I think our unschooling journey as a family was pretty much a very self-directed one in itself because we kind of landed at unschooling and started practicing it before we knew that there was a term for it. So, like, I kind of thought, we came up with this new way of living and learning with children, and then we were quite disappointed to discover that it's an age-old practice. And we were also happy to discover that we weren't crazy and it's been an age-old practice and, in practice. And so, with my son, eldest, being about 24, so I would say we've been on this journey for like 24 years now. And it's a constantly evolving journey. And that's what I'm excited about talking today about some of the vocabulary that goes into this journey and how that the meaning of those words change as we learn and grow. I sort of, being the only unschooling family at the time that we knew, I kind of like worked really hard to find and build community. And so we do have quite a substantial community now in South Africa. This November is Unschoolers Camp year 11. We've held 2 conferences already. It's pretty much a self-growing system now, and very organic and not really in need of one person driving it. It's a self-driven system. I think that's what I'm going to say, at least here in SA. And that's it from me until as we go along.
Yeah,
Akilah.
thank you. Thank you,
Yeah.
Zakiyya. Yes, and we also will want to hear a little bit from you in a moment. And then we'll move into that vocab and talk a little bit more about it. But first, we thought it would be good to just give a little bit of how we intend to flow here. Video off or on, whatever makes sense for you, makes sense for us, doesn't matter. Audio, we do ask that you keep yourself muted just so everyone can hear everyone. When we're engaging, which is really at any point after this, you can unmute and just begin to talk. We trust the space that if a few people start talking at the same time, other people will mute, or we can come in and support that if needed. There's also the chat. We will be paying attention to the chat. So if folks want to drop things in there, and if you want to put up a little emoji to indicate that there's something in the chat, if you don't want to do it vocally, that's okay. Really, we're just wanting it to be a space where we can engage at whatever levels make sense for each of us. I see that Sifan, I don't know if I'm pronouncing the name properly, has the hand raised. So there's an example of that, how you do that emoji. And I don't know if you have that there because you have a question. Good. Okay, it's off. So right next to breakout rooms on my screen, that's the share screen, recording, breakout rooms, and then reactions. That reactions one is where you can put a thing if you want to raise your hand, or put a heart emoji if you love something someone's saying. So feel free to use that space too, if you'd like. Or I just do like this. Can do, whatever works for you. So yeah, that's it on that. And you can drop any questions in here for us in the chat. And you can go from everyone directly to me or Zakiyya if there's something that you need our support on in here. We also intend to have a post gathering thingy for you, which is basically going to be the collection of this vocabulary, the ones that we're starting with and the ones that we will build out together in relationship with you here. We'll make sure that you get that afterward because we really do want to continue the conversation. Okay, so Anything else, Zakiyya? Did I miss anything else up front before we go? Okay, cool. All right. And this is not a presentation, y'all. So once we get in, please feel free to engage. So for context, I'm actually just gonna read again the description for our chat. It says, we invite you to a conversation about how our levels of awareness around certain words affected how we came to embrace unschooling, how we resisted or still resist it, and what it means in relation to one particular word, and that word is community. Is there a difference between the definition of a word and an understanding of it? We think so, and we want to sit with you to explore the vocabulary that's been emerging for us over our years of just trying to do this work of raising free people, being in community that supports that freedom. So that's what this is about. I think that before Zakiyya is going to ask you a question, I want to give the context of language as both something that exists already and something that we have the right and many opportunities to create. Off the top, that feels important to me because there in vocabulary and in the evolution of it, there's a lot of reclamation of wording, which I also think is a cultural norm that in most cultures that if the one that I'm part of or the ones that I'm part of and the things that I get to observe, there are terminologies, words that they might have started out meaning something, but then it's been reclaimed culturally and it means something else. Or being in relationship with someone else helps you to realize the different context of a term, or you create something together that just fits into what your needs are. I feel like it's important to lay that here as we think about language and vocabulary. So not just the ones that exist and the definitions as we know them, but the ones that emerge and the ones that we create together. So with that in mind, I'll pass it on to Zakiyya to try to open up to hear a little bit from you.
Yeah, thanks. That's a perfect place for me to jump in. So, what I want to ask for all of you, and I think we'd like to go around the room and get something from you, is when you think about that children are people, like real people. In practice, in how you live that, in how you're experiencing that, what is hopefully there are many words, but pick one word that you want to talk about that comes to mind for you, and how that, and you could share anything about that word, how it plays out for you, how you struggle with it, how it's evolved. So something about this word that speaks to you that you'd like to share with us in relation to that would be language around the fact that children are people, free people, real people. Make sense? Okay. Thinking I'd like to start with people whose videos are on, because it gives me a sense of comfort to start there. Or maybe I can just go, maybe you can just raise your hands and then I'll just call somebody out. And yeah, let's do that. Let's go with raised hands. I'm going out of my comfort zone now to try a different style. Oh, where do I look for raised hands?
It should show up right on the screen, like a little thing that pops up. Yeah, there it is. Sifan is modeling that for us.
Okay, I'm not sure if I understood the question, but it's about words that we find problematic, is it?
No, one word that speaks to you, that makes you, that you love and apply, and that speaks about, that relates to the fact that children are real people. So, maybe partnership would be a word that is in practice.
Yeah, and my word is resistance, the one that comes up for me all the time, because it's one that I have a different relationship. It has evolved for me, my understanding of resistance. So that would be my word. That's an example. Or partnership. Yeah.
You got it, Stefan?
I'm not fully sure, but like a word that I'm having mixed emotions about is the word learner.
Okay. Why?
Thank you. Yeah.
Why? Because so how do we describe? So we I mean, we're currently closed because of COVID, but otherwise we are running a sort of center. And then the people who come, if we call these children learners, it seems to create this still dynamic that, so they are the learners, then what are we? Are we the educators? And then is there then the power differential between the people whose job is to educate and the people who are coming here in order to learn? And I'm not entirely comfortable with that dynamic, but I don't know what else to call them. I mean, we could call them children, and in a very legal sense, they are children, but then children and adult also creates a dynamic.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we get that totally. Yeah, thank you for that. So learner, yes, we'll add that to the mix. Anyone else? Adventurous, I see that in the chat, Zakiyya, adventurous.
Adventurous. Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. And then I'm going to read this other one here. So is it Kezia? Is that, it's like my childhood friend's name. So Kezia put responsibility, because we find it so difficult to give children responsibility for themselves. We are more comfortable taking responsibility. Yeah. Yes. Tatia put human. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, that's a big one in terms of the evolution of that understanding over time. Bruno put student as a problematic one as well. Yeah, student. Yep. Yes. Anyone else?
Oh, wow. Reflection. Because children reflect who we are as adults or society. Very, yes. Wow, I love that.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. We saw that hand raise. You can go ahead and unmute. Yes.
I was searching around, I couldn't actually find the raise hand. I've been on Zoom pretty much for the last 2 years, but I can't figure out how to put my hand on Zoom. Sorry about that. Sincerity, I think, is something that I've got. It's actually a real love for the word sincerity, I think. And it doesn't necessarily being responding exactly to the emotions that you're feeling at the time, but it's being real to who you are and understanding who and accepting people for being real for who they are, sort of thing. And I think that sincerity is so wonderful for emotional expression, emotional development, and relationship, and sort of that sort of thing. I think so sincerity is one of my favorite words at the moment. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for that. And I'm loving already the way that we're realizing, because folks are even putting that in the chat. And when Stefan was talking about, the idea of the word being, it's like we're not sure how we feel about it, like to keep that in mind as well. It could be a word that you think kind of goes in a few different directions. And we also have power in here, because there's a lot of talk about empowerment, but not much sharing of power in public schools. Yes, we have friendships. Why don't we work hard enough to establish friendships with our younger beings? We have respect for natural order. There is honesty. Yes, imitation. That's a really interesting one too. There's so many layers to that. Friendship came up again for folks. Sharing. Yeah. I feel I'm trying to invite my children who are 5, 7, and 9 to share feelings, thoughts, ideas, but it is likely they resist this, feeling forced or pushed. Yes. Reflection, did we say that already? Because children reflect who we are as adults or society. Yes. We also have in here authentic and interdependence. Yeah, huge one. Interdependence. that makes me think again about like the evolution of terminology, moving from independent to interdependent, and recognizing that there's also participation here, but more than just being there. Participation, but more than just being there. Yes, Derry. Mm-hmm. Yep. Anyone else want to chime in? We want to do a lot of gathering in this part. Yeah, go right ahead, unmute.
Just obviously part of the word we're talking about is the word freedom. And that's also another very powerful one that is a very important one that can be very easily misimplemented, and sort of finding that is also a lovely, another one that's an important one.
Yeah. Absolutely. I would add, because we already have some. So let's go there. Let's keep it there. I love this. And a lot of the words, of course, for me feel connected to each other. You know, like we could almost create a paragraph and add some things in between and create something from all of these words, a narrative of sorts. Y'all see that too, like the connection between the things, because of course, like authenticity and power and freedom and sincerity and respect, reflection, the connection therein. Yep. Anyone else want to drop anything in the chat or say before we continue? Okay, cool. But we got a good little group of words going, which is so good. I'm excited to see how this flows as we think about them and talk about them. So I want to share a little bit about how we're thinking about vocabulary and the evolution of vocabulary, as in the way that it starts off like a meaning, you know, like you need the confines of it, even the term unschooling, which is one that some people really like and some people really don't, and then some people feel indifferent to. Just this idea of the way that a word can start off for us in this journey as meaning one thing. And then as we continue, we move away from the thing that it was defined as over into our understanding of it, because unlike the definition of it, the understanding is influenced by being in relationship with other people, so that the definition isn't restricted by what we think it means, but by what we are discovering, sometimes based on how the person reacts, like how someone in the chat was saying how sharing, using the word sharing, and like, well, when I'm sharing with a young person, this is what it feels like I'm doing here. When I say sharing, this is what I mean. But when I try to share based on how I mean it, here is the feedback that I'm getting from them. It's resistance. So what's happening there? That for us feels evolutionary, because then we get to move outside of the confines of a definition over into the context of understanding it. So when we say the evolution of the words, that's kind of what we mean by that. And we really wanted to bring that here and get your insights on that as well. Do you find that in your own life and practice that you move from definition to understanding? And if so, anything about that you'd want to share, any examples of that or stumbling blocks with that?
I'm going to go first, while you guys are thinking. And just think about when so many of the concepts that I understood, what was really interesting is that I had an idea of it and I thought we were living it and I had it in practice, only to discover that it was experienced or not experienced by my children the way I envisioned it or felt it or thought it. So our embodiment of the same concept was so different, and our experience of it was so different. And that's something to keep in, like something, I think that word freedom for me also comes up so often when I hear somebody say, I allow them the freedom to do something. I'm like, okay, if you're allowing them, then they're not actually free. So those two words should never be in the same sentence, but they are. And I mean, I think for long, and it's well intentioned. So, when you think about words, what other words go with it that invalidate that word in the same experience or sentence or practice? So yeah, that was, yeah.
Yes, yes, yes. I love that connection, Zakiyya, between the ways like our intention and our action. That's what I hear there, that we can sometimes plow over young people with our intention if we're not looking for the way that meaning is received. And even though we're so clear about where we're coming from, we have to invite constantly that sort of consent-based relationship, which means that I'm checking in to see whether this is okay, what the resistance looks like, what the acceptance looks like, and not just being stuck in where my intention is. And that's a thing that happens in a lot of different dynamics and relationships, which is what I love about this work, because these practices are not limited to our relationships with young people, but they're so much the point where we can practice them and get the sort of accountability of that direct feedback of the young person, you know? Yeah. And remember, y'all, you can unmute, you can raise your hand, because we want to, things are so much better when we have a diversity of insights and perspectives, even when they are simply just questions or you kind of flowing through your thoughts out loud about what arose. All right. You don't have to have a beautifully crafted sentence or thought to unmute and share. So I'm trying to make sure I'm not missing. Okay, no one unmuted, right? I feel like I'm hearing folks. Okay, so I will touch then the evolution of understanding. We just talked about the evolution of vocabulary, essentially going from the definition to the understanding. And when we talk about understanding, what shows up for me is like, just like in my mother work, understanding is about learning to sit with something different. Understanding how my thoughts about a thing or my intention about a thing can be not enough, and that isn't necessarily something to shy away from or even try to fix, but something to explore. So a lot of the evolutions feel for me like exploratory and not so much a thing that I'm like, well, how do I solve this? How do I figure this out? So that's the other thing to name too, when you're moving from your intention and your definition over into the understanding, how will that, just knowing that evolution, that understanding will also evolve over time, and that it should evolve over time in relation to the people around you. Because of community, you know, how we mentioned that one word, all the vocabulary words that we're going to go into in a second are, well, we've already started, are tied to community, because language and practice and relationship happens in community. So when we are at something like this, you know, wonderful gathering of people who are really looking at liberation and learning differently and rights differently, we are communing so that we allow for a diversity of perspectives, and we allow ourselves to be listened to and to be the listener, you know, to be listened for, and all of these things. If we are not doing that, if we're in our silo studying and trying to apply, then we have to challenge our understanding of community, and whether we are in community in ways that are beneficial for the community or just useful for us. Because in the case with our children, oftentimes we are that first community. So we wanted to name that too and see if anything arose for y'all specifically around community.
I think it would be good for any. So, yeah, what is your experience of community at the moment? Like, how many of you have that community that feeds you as a family or in this journey?
May I?
Okay.
In the beginning of my journey, the community was something like the people that I get together physically, something like that. I mean, when you talk about, I think about the evolution of that word. I mean, the definition and the understanding has changed through the way. And along the way, I understand, I had another perception of community, that community for me is now to be in touch with people who can understand me. I mean, who are able to listen to me, and who can, that I'm basically there. I'm there, existing there for their, they can express themselves without being, without the fear of being judged, kind of thing. So when I come together with some people who are interested in the same topics, like children's rights or kind of community making practices or peace, that kind of things, I feel in a way connected with them, and it's a kind of feeling that that's my tribe, and I feel comfortable there, and I can reflect what I see, and they reflect back. So that's what I feel, I think, as a community right now.
Yeah, I like that word connection that you used, Azlum, Arkun. That is where it comes from. I mean, I can't see like connection. It's community is so fundamental in order to have connection, and we can't function without connection. We can't. So that is the most important thing, I think, as a container for everything else. Connecting all these other concepts and just connecting us.
I'm here now. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm listening to two sessions at the same time, so I'm glad I heard you say my name. And this is very important sessions for me. So big thanks for everything you're doing here. So you're asking for examples of how we have weakened our children. Oh, the things I've already shared. Well, real quickly.
I think Thomas is, yeah.
Yeah, I realized that. It's like, oh, he's in the second row. Oh, good. I love it. Multitasking effectively. Yeah. I don't know that life. Yeah. Did I see? I think I saw someone else's. Oh, okay. Kate. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. For me, community is a really charged word. I think because for such a long time in my life, it was all about like geographical location. So like throwing people who were in the same place, school, lived in the same area, and calling it community and trying to make it feel like it was something that it wasn't, like I didn't feel a shared value or shared mission with any of the people, but we were told that this was community because we were all there. And I always kind of wondered, as I moved from one like place to another, where it was like the high school, then the college, then it was like I was supposed to feel something that I didn't, because we were all in the same place. And I think it's only when I began kind of like tearing apart what that was for me, and then also like the deschooling process, where it was like, what do I actually believe? Like getting in touch with my intuition again and seeking out people who felt similarly. It wasn't about like we're all people who live in the same place, or we're all just happen to be mothers of children of this same age, or we're just, I was just like, it never worked for me. And I find that now that I am an unschooler and I am continually going through this deschooling process, it's people online that have been real community, where they've allowed me to be vulnerable, which is hard for me, and allowed me to be open with feelings and hard things and all of that. And I think that it's an intentional community. It's something that feels like I chose it and these people chose it, and we're all in this space together.
Yes, moving it out of the confines of geography and over into something different, something more vast, something more inclusive. Yeah, yeah, totally. Thanks, Kate. Luce, yeah. Uh-oh, I can't hear. Can y'all? Mm-mm. Let's see.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. So there are too many things that come to my mind, so it's gonna be really hard to explain it in something simple. But is that idea of community, for example, is something that, or the concept per se, is something that evolves depending on the experience that we go through. For example, as some of you were saying before, community was something restricted to kind of people I was interacting with. But through traveling and seeing other cultures and actually seeing the difference with other cultures, then I understood that my concept of community was quite narrow, and then it's kind of expanding, but I don't really know anymore where the boundaries are either. So it's like I don't have the definition, but maybe it's something that which kinds of generates some uncomfortable feeling, or what is this? Because it's just really, that's what I wrote, interdependence. It's like inside that community, where is that whole, I think the meaning is different in every place that I go, and then I try to understand and try to broaden a little bit more that spectrum to understand better that concept. But I agree with Kate that one of the most important things for that community is being in a safe space where you can be vulnerable and you can be different inside that community, because that's another thing. Inside a community, probably everybody is different and like different things, and then which is really confusing because you are supposed to all go towards the same thing, but then you might all be different and like different stuff. So, but having the opportunity to have that space and be a safe space where you can be who you are, different to other people. Yeah, I'm gonna leave it there.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And I jotted down when you were saying that, Luce, like how that community defines community and how I see myself in that, because you're right, that it's going to mean different things in lots of different spaces. So I bring my understanding, but then there's also the understanding of that community. So the variety, and even when you said we should be going towards the same thing, then I think of, oh yes, community is also questioning. Because then I was like, oh, should we be going towards the same thing? Is that what it means? For some people, yes. So, right. So like, what are some of the questions that come up as we think about what community means or as it shifts? Thanks for that. And then I saw someone else that it wasn't yes, go right ahead, please. Yeah.
Yeah, I still haven't figured out how to raise it.
That's okay.
No, please, no one tell me. This is going to be a history of my life. I love it.
It's interdependence. We're going to help you.
Exactly. This is excellent. This is brilliant. Yeah, I guess that. I mean, obviously, myself being involved with the Summerhill community, I've got a very deep sort of connection with that specific sort of element. But I think that. I guess sort of slightly detached from that, something I feel so much is sort of the connection to relationship within community, and what your relationship to the community is, and what then what the ability to a certain extent of the importance of the relationship, the size of the community, and the importance of the relationship you're having within that. And I feel that, especially with community, I think that it's very important that the relationships can be strong with all of the things within the community to actually make the community what it is. And I think that often when you're talking about community, and I think this is something that's happening very much at the moment with sort of, if you will, globalization, and everybody's saying that we should all be a part of the same thing, but to a certain extent, it's making it more difficult to build these lovely, warm relationships. And to me, that's what's so wonderfully powerful about community is the relationships that happen within it. And if they're not very strong, then the relationship, then the community becomes very quickly unsustainable to a certain extent. And whether that means they need to be smaller or not necessarily, whatever. But that's something I see so strongly with the Summerhill community. The fact that it's quite small and we don't open up to the broader world that much is actually such a valuable part of it, because everybody's really feeling it and tasting it, and they're right a part of it, and it's part of their skin, and they're immersed in it, and it's such a wonderful, beautiful thing. Anyway, so that was just sort of something to add, really. Anyway.
Yeah. And I saw the heads nodding and all of that too. Yeah, that the micro in it, the pieces that make up that thing are so important as well, because again, we're so accustomed to community being this thing around geography or even like ideas, which then, so again, about the questioning of what does that mean? What does it take? And I find that out by being in relationship and then determining what our configurations might look like. Yeah. Kezia?
All of us, sorry, I was just going to
go
add
ahead.
a bit more. Sorry. I think all of us are feeling this much more today, that our neighborhoods, the word community is almost being imposed upon us, of we should care of our community, but we don't really know who our community is. We haven't really had that. We don't have that opportunity in today's world really to actually really build that again. And it's more and more, it's sort of things are becoming smaller and smaller and closed and becoming into households rather than neighborhoods. And it's becoming much harder almost. Whether it's societal, again, coming back to the meaning of the word, societal imposition of what the word community is, and we're then feeling we should try and fulfill it, where we're not actually building an emotional relationship to do it with motivation and enthusiasm, because we haven't got that relationship to it. So it's almost the building of relationships naturally creates community anyway, but sort of an interesting thought.
Yeah, I think for me, the simple test of whether you feel like you're part of that community or not, or whether when you start feeling that word responsibility comes. If you feel like you have a responsibility to that community, to show up in a certain way, to participate, to take and to give, then you community. But otherwise, if you're not, or like how Kate was talking about, we're just thrown together, that's that's force, and you're not, then that you don't feel any responsibility to it, then it's not community, it's just gathering, I think. Or I don't know what the other word is, but the word responsibility has to come in if we're thinking about community.
Yeah, I see Kezia has had her hand up for some time. Is that how you pronounce your name?
It's Kezia, but yeah.
Kezia, thanks. Yeah, go ahead, Kezia.
Actually, Zakiyya said it better than what I was going to say, but I was going to say that when we decided to create our learning setting, I think we thought about building a community, but the primary goal was to have a shared space where children could be free together. And I think over time, we've realized that what we're actually about is creating a community together. And that it's not that the freedom is secondary to that, but it's within it. And it's finding the freedom as a community and finding the responsibility, and that it's proven harder than I expected. And trying to figure out what it is together is challenging, but I feel our responsibility to each other growing, and it is becoming more like something that we believe in together, as opposed to flatmates, like we're all in this building doing our own thing, and that's cool.
I hear that. And the word responsibility, I was jotting down, that's a huge one in so much of the practice for me, just in my mother work directly, like what does responsibility mean? How do I categorize a thing or a person as responsible? what are the responsibilities, and accountability feels connected to that and very much connected to community. Because as Zakiyya said, I agree with that. If you are not feeling a sense of responsibility, and then I would add, if there isn't an ecology of accountability, like how do we deal with the realities, the norms, the necessities of the differing whatevers, and then when we are working those things and are working to shift where we need to, what do our accountability ecologies look like? Because that to me is such an important part of community, is how we hold accountability. Are we tossing people out when they don't get something right? Are we really looking at our language and our practices and what the invitations are and what the barriers are? Those are things that, because many of us come from a schooled space, we are kind of in that forced sense of community where it's like, well, these are your neighbors and these are your, you ride the bus with them, but you're not in actual relationship, and the accountability is outsourced to an adult who that's really outsourced to a whole nother system. There are all these things outside of it that affect how the people in the community are, but the accountability and the responsibilities don't even sit inside that community. They're actually something else. There are other things that are playing the parts. So that feels really important too, as we think about where do responsibility and accountability sit for us as members of community, as seekers of community, Yeah, and there's so much richness in this chat too. I want to make sure that if we can pop in there too. Yes. Fatima says the online communities help create the different communities that we as multifaceted beings require to grow and belong. It helps lessen the feeling of alienation that comes from marginal facets of existing. Yes, word. Yeah. If we take the word participation, for me, it's about being a part and not being apart. Yes, absolutely. I want to live in a world where there is space for many worlds. Yes, Gustavo Esteva. Yeah. Good. I want to looking into make sure we're not missing any hands.
Emma, I'm not clear on what Emma's saying though. There can be community around being against schooling, etc., stemming from feelings of anger, rejection, and power, which is not taking responsibility.
Where's Emma? Emma, do you want to put more in the chat or say? Yeah. And then so that makes me think about whether it goes back to community as we understand it, because if there's not a taking of responsibility. Okay, thank you. And only if you want to, Emma, all good. Yeah, because we can gather around things, we can organize around things, but if there isn't that sense of responsibility happening, then we question whether or not that's community, like an allyship rather than a community. I see. Yep, that's okay. Yeah, go ahead. Thank you for being here. Right, allyship. So, and that's another word, another term that we absolutely can look at the evolution of that allyship. Yeah. Anyone else on that? On the ways that we might gather and organize, but lack. Okay, I see Aslam. Aslam, did you have a hand up?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Responsibility is a contradictory term for me. I'm very much enjoying the conversation here, yet I have been in a community a few years ago, and it was not an unschooling community. It was a community of responsible people, actually. But maybe I can talk about a little bit about this schooling or the schooled minds of responsibility. I mean, when I feel responsible of something, there is a fear of not being accepted or you know, like being punished or being regarded can be a kind of reason for responsibility in this kind of communities. I mean, especially in missionary communities, like it was a kind of a revolutionary community which has kind of concerns about social justice and so on. But, you know, in the relationship, I think some other things might follow, might be parallel with the feeling of responsibility, like everyone should be enjoying their time there. I mean, taking their responsibility can be another way of self-actualization, not being another missionary, or not being someone who is, I mean, responsibility should be coming from the inner needs, or I don't know if it's clear, but it's a contradictory term for me when it's just quoted as responsibility. It might be allied with some other words too, like friendship, or like being equals, or like having relationships without hierarchy, that kind of things. I mean.
So when I used it as in terms of that's how you test whether you feel like you're part of that community, I think the other word that could come to mind is whether you feel your own value in that community. So your participation, you know, there's what you bring to that community, and your participation is of value and of importance in upholding that community. And so you feel a sense of responsibility to participate. And an example would be, so a shared space and there's litter, then and you're walking past and you pick it up, and it's because, you know, this is a space you care about and feel like you also have a responsibility to keep it in a specific way. Or a shared space where any kind of voluntary participation, I would say, and as in adding value in keeping it together, because it also adds value to you. So that's what the kind of underlying values that go along with that word, responsibility, when I think about it in terms of community.
And I find it useful to question these things. Like, this is exactly the point, because when, as you were saying that, Aslam, I think about the directionality of responsibility. It does, from that schoolish space, it is different than how Zakiyya is explaining it, which for me is more about the communal space, where responsibility from a schoolish space tends to be a hierarchical thing. Someone with power over you is telling you what you are responsible for, and then you just do that. You hold that responsibility, you have it, it's been given to you. Whereas in the sense of community, I agree with Zakiyya, where that word for me is more about my sense of belonging and the role of my contributions to that space, because I know that I'm getting from it, and that I feel that as a part of that getting from it, there's also my responsibility that I decided for me to do that. And then that's valued in the space. So the direction of it isn't this top-down thing, which doesn't mean then this isn't like a replacement of the definition that you have, but it's really about looking at, this is about community too. So we're in community now. So if we use that term and someone else has a very different experience with it, how wonderful that we can now be with that and say, oh, here's what that meaning is, which can shift our understanding of where we're coming from with it. I hear that. Yeah, okay, responsibility. So I see an example of my setting, a commitment to show up versus a requirement to attend. Yeah, a commitment to show up versus a requirement to attend. It seems like the same thing, but it's not. One is volunteered, whereas the other is imposed. Yeah, like you didn't feel like it was your responsibility to da 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 da, because if not, then this from someone else. But for you, the consent, your choice, your participation in the thing that's happening. Mm-hmm. Thanks for that.
Can I add to that a little?
Please.
Yeah, it's kind of like when you value something enough, you volunteer, you give that commitment voluntarily, full-heartedly. Whereas I feel like a lot of what people do in life is they show up, they participate because they feel it's expected of them, and it's shifting that mindset, like, why am I here? Why have I committed to that? It's my commitment, as opposed to my parent made this commitment and so I go along with it. It's a slightly different. Does that make sense?
To me, it does. Yeah. Yeah. Luz, was that? No, you're just doing like this. Okay. Yeah. And then it makes me think about power, as we're talking about who determines that responsibility. And also because we are available, sometimes a responsibility will be named that we might not have recognized or would not have volunteered for because we didn't even see it as such. But if we are in community in the ways that I'm understanding community, then we're also we are allowing for that. We recognize that. We're listening to each other. We're listening out for each other. We're listening out for the spaces that we can be more engaged, as opposed to determining up front, look, this is how I came here. This is what I'm doing. That sort of difference. It's a softening so that we start out in community under whatever similar things we agree to, but we kind of soften into, into each other's edges a bit, so that new understandings are showing up and new ways of recognizing what responsibility might mean, and how we might even use different terminology if that's what our community is calling for, so that we are actually sharing meaning. So that also sounds like a power thing in that way, as in a reclaiming and a revisiting and a broadening and deepening of the understanding of power. I feel like power is such a huge one in this practice, right? Like the ideas of how we understood power, especially for me, like power was a thing out there, I was fighting the power. And then as I continued, it's like, you're the freaking power. And in some cases, you're the problematic power, and not just with my children. So then how do we move as we start to both, for me, own the power to be a free person and to raise free people, but also recognize my role as oppressor, oppressor and oppressed, power over power with, and, from all the spectrums. So I wonder, or the angles of the spectrum. So I wonder about that too. How are y'all feeling about power? What shifts have shown up for you specifically around power? If anyone cares to share. What? No one wants to share about power? Let's see.
I don't want to talk too much, but I have something else to say on this. We felt in our setting for the last, we kind of doubled in size last year, and we felt when we suddenly had half the people again, but knew that the community lost its structure, its fabric. And so we wanted to re-solidify this. And something we did a few weeks ago was work together in small groups on what we wanted to be and what was important to us. And we looked at our charter and revised it and everything. And then we came back together in a big meeting to hear what all the little groups thought. And there was this amazing sharing of feelings and thoughts and needs, and the teenagers that I had never heard speak up in this way before prepared this big speech and told off many of the staff members in some ways and said, you know, sometimes you take too long to say things, and other times you just need to take the decision, and then other times you really need to ask us more. And it was so powerful. I've never heard any of our students take responsibility for their community in this way before. One of the things that they said was that they recognized that they had a responsibility as a role model, and that was also really, really powerful. So I guess what's my experience that I'm sharing is that it's not enough to just say that you're equal. Like, you have to actively ask people and seek out that, you know, you can't just say, okay, we're a democracy, you've all got to vote, and expect that to work. And that these meetings really, you know, we said, well, you know, do we want to be a democracy? You know, and would you rather that we just made all the decisions? They went, no, you know, okay, so how are we going to make decisions then? Oh, I guess we'll have to have meetings. And we in the end, we agreed our meetings had to be much shorter, which was really important. And we now have a strict timer, 20 minutes, and you can only speak twice and for 90 seconds. And the students all said, oh, now it's going to be shorter, we'll show up more. And so by asking them and by drawing them in and actively sharing our power with them and literally saying to them, we don't want this power, we want to share it with you. How can we do that better? I feel that we have shifted in our culture, and it's still not perfect, but it feels more community than it did 3 weeks ago. So yeah, that's my law.
Carol, did I see? Thank you for that. Yeah, totally. And were you raising your hand, Carol, or were you pointing at someone? Can't see. Okay, please unmute.
Well, you know, I was working with an unschooling community way back in the day when there weren't that many of us. And but we had come up with a very functional, smoothly functioning kind of leaderless group structure, where there was nobody in charge, there was no board, there was no, you know, staff, anything but, and every family would just contribute activities, or, you know, it had that kind of responsibility. Every family would just contribute something, they would organize something, you know, and a thing that we realized early on, though, was that, again, because there were so few of us in those days, we couldn't insist on a kind of ideological uniformity. People were at different phases of deschooling. They had different comfort levels with what they were going to do with their kids, and we had to kind of allow them space to evolve, you know, at their own pace with that, and just be supported rather than feeling judged or critiqued, you know, by the community. And it all would work really beautifully. And I did also talk to some other people working with, you know, homeschooling, unschooling groups in those days who had a similar experience. You have this whole thing that's working really nicely, and then someone comes in from the outside and says, well, you know, this is really great, but you just need to be a little more structured. You need to be a little more organized, and basically starts bringing really schoolish ideas in and wanting to impose them on the entire group, which is a completely different thing than one family just needs to make their kids do math. That's what they have to do, but they're not imposing it on others. So it was an interesting ongoing problem. It happened for us a couple of times. And how to deal with that in terms of the power of it. Because when someone comes in like that, it can be divisive in the community. And one group of people will wind up saying, well, let's do what this person says. And another group will say, well, no, but we don't all want to do that. And then, you know, you can start to have accusations of control because people aren't able to agree on how to orient towards this new thing. And so, yeah, the people who are resistant to the change start to be accused of being controlling. And it just gets really complicated on a interpersonal level. It left me feeling like you almost needed to have something understood up front about how we were all going to kind of maintain the boundaries of our autonomy and at the same time be in community and kind of not introduce into the community things where you're kind of imposing your ideas on so it was complicated, and there was no perfect solution, but it left me feeling like, well, what is the path forward with that?
Yeah, thanks for that, Carolyn. Though that's it's a thing that so many of us experience, right? The complexities of that, and a lot of the ways that, like, wherever we are in our deschooling journey, and how that can butt up against the idea of organizing something where it's just so easy to get back in that bag of like, all right, well then what are the rules? And if I don't like it, then what happens? And how come this thing feels like more of a schoolish structure, but can we, in this context, is it actually useful for us, and what shifts would need to happen in order to have this be sustainably useful? So I feel like we're used to setting a structure and then being like, well, this is the structure. And then if something isn't working, we just need to lean into the structure. Whereas what we're doing now is not that at all. We are the structure. We're leaning on each other. We're leaning on our shifts in understanding. And so it can be so layered to determine kind of what those next steps are, even in the thing. When you're trying to do, like when you have a particular result, you're not just being together, you're trying to do something together. I hear those layers all the time, which is, again, where, as you talk about the boundaries, that's a huge word that has shifted so much in my understanding and continues to shift, like what boundaries mean, how we approach them with each other. How do we erect boundaries around the things we want to do, and how do we as the people in it nurture the boundary of how we see the thing? There are just so many layers and levels of it, and it can be hard to not apply a schoolish lens of, all right, well, what's the thing to do to solve it, or what's the structure to solve it? It really is about being together and determining moment by moment, which things are sustainable, and in which ways do we move into smaller groups. I've seen that as a solution, in a sense, for lack of a better term at the moment, where you move into micro sort of work groups and do a little bit of diving in and coming back up and saying, all right, can these things we're into help us determine how we might be able to do them together, as opposed to blaming the person, or the clarity, or all the other things that we tend to need to have in place before we go forward. So I really appreciate bringing up the layers of that, because that's what it is, super layered. So we've brought in other words too, like power and consent and the sense of autonomy. Trust is a huge one in the mix. I'm constantly working that term, trust. What does it mean to be trustworthy? How do I show that I trust a thing? What happens when we trust each other, but not the process that we develop together? What happens when we're just not a trustful people because of our own baggage, and then we come into a space where we do need to trust into things? There are just so many of the terms that are connected to how we commune and how we do things together, right? Yeah. I guess that I'm looking at Luce's comment, I guess that there is where consent can start playing. A question that I can be asked is, are you willing to try it? Yeah, right. This the sociocratic model of, is this good enough for now, safe enough to try? And are we going to come back to this in this time together and see another thing that might be good enough for now, safe enough to try? Yeah, yeah. Even that word safe or safety, the safe space language is one that people use all the time, but I am a person that I don't think I've ever experienced what felt like a safe space. I don't feel safe. And that's just what's true for me. But it doesn't mean that I can't be comfortable enough or feel safe enough in a space. And that knowledge is important in a group, and even my level of responsibility for naming that, so that a facilitator or whoever can know, like, it's not about safe space for me. These sorts of things, which is also about boundaries again. Yeah. Anything else arising for you, for anyone, as you're listening or feeling through it?
I have to take the thingies off every time I want to speak. But yeah, I think that one really important thing, I guess, in all this is always keep a conversation. I know it's really hard to feel safe to actually say things that are really hard for us, but the first step is being aware of what makes us uncomfortable and what make us feel weird, but then being able to express that in front of that community and say, I don't like this because of this, or this is the fear I have. And then when people start understanding the position that you are, that's actually easier for them to maybe propose other thing and maybe rearrange things in order for everybody to have that consent and try something in which everybody is going to feel comfortable. But I think that once that you hear another person, what they feel, if they're struggling and so on, it's really hard to stay blind to it, no? Because it's when they are telling you, I feel this, and then you're like, okay, it seems that for you is way more important than for me, so maybe I can, in this particular situation, give that up, and then I had to go.
Yeah, Carol, was it? Yeah.
I guess Zakiyya had asked, what do boundaries mean in that kind of situation? And I guess I just threw the word out there kind of carelessly, but I think that for me in the community situation, the sense of boundaries meant if somebody is coming and proposing something, and this is really different when you have a democratic school or if you have, an unschooling group, which is a much more provisional community, and people's commitment to working out really difficult emotional conflicts with each other may not be fully present. You're really trying to build a much more tentative kind of community. So you do have to kind of allow people some space. So, but that where we ran aground was when someone came in and wanted to impose something that would affect everybody, and some of the group just weren't comfortable with that. It actually was kind of a really silly thing. Somebody came in and proposed, the very new member came in and proposed that we have a yearbook for our group. And that, because our usual thing was, well, anyone who wants to organize an activity can organize it. She wanted to organize a yearbook for our group. And she had a really complicated format for it, that she wanted all the kids to have to answer certain questions that she had come up with, and their page would be aligned in a sense that she had come up with, and this was going to be the yearbook for our group with our group's name on it. And people just had, actually, the kids were like, well, I don't want to answer those questions. I mean, why can't we just do whatever, they're unschooled kids. They're like, let us just do whatever page we want to do. And interestingly, that became a really divisive issue, and it raised strong emotions in people, because some members of the group felt this is taking over sort of our group identity. This is asking our kids to do things that our whole group is not about that. So it became quite divisive. And it is interesting how something can trigger a pretty strong response that, in a way, you could say, oh, it seems silly, but it triggered pretty strong emotions in people, and was quite interesting. So Yeah, so for us, it really became a thing of, you've got to make enough space that people who are really committed to, unschooling and deschooling and, living in this very alternative way, don't feel that they're being roped back into sort of oppressive structures. Again, but we didn't have that codified, and we didn't have a really active discussion about it. And so it just became confusing and, emotional. Yeah. And people didn't have the commitment to work that out with each other. So.
Groundwork, right? Like the stuff up front, that's what comes up to me, the groundwork, the things that, the containers, again, as we talked about community. So if the container or the groundwork or whatever isn't there, anything, because we're peopling together, anything can become a thing, right? A thing that feels trivial because it isn't even about the thing, it's about the approach. And as you said, like the underlying sense of, well, where's consent? Where's consent here? I'm going to push back. And that's why resistance is such an important part of my deschooling practice, because I keep feeling that resistance is such a roadmap. And it's great when you don't have to meet resistance because you knew the thing before or you had the skill before, but that's less normal in my life. What's more normal is, oh shit, and then being able to say, all right, what is happening here? Pulling from my unschooling bag to really try to listen, to witness what is happening, as opposed to coming in with where I'm coming from. So like the groundwork, a lot of the things that we do in communities, or even as I work with families and organizations, is to really try to do this sort of thing and talk about not so much core values. They are about core values, but your language for how you do things, you as a person, before you even talk about together, your language for how you do things. Because when Kezia mentioned with the students, with the young folks, how they were like, wait a minute, we actually do need you we want to share power with you. We don't actually want to have all of it. Some of the things are about invitations, and then some of them might be about assertions. And I think we tend to default to assertion when we're trying to structure or even conveying our thing and feeling committed to that, as opposed to the invitation of, here's an idea that I have. And then allowing that to make space for that sort of shared meaning, to see how somebody approaches a thing and say, oh, in this space, that ain't gonna fly, because everybody's not gonna want to answer these 19 questions, these sort of things. So I think I hear a lot about invitations as part of our groundwork, so that we can have that sort of understanding of each other that we will need, not upfront, but for the process. Because I think that knowing shit up front thing is another schoolish trap, I don't know.
It's 1:15. I think we end at 25 past for the next session, to give them time for the next session. So that leaves us with 10 minutes. And something that I'm curious to know is, has there been, has there been a shift in your understanding of any particular word, or any particular shift that came about today from this discussion? And I'm going to start with mine, and that is that word responsibility, because I'm so far out of that schooled mindset now that I forgot that it has this whole other dimension to it, and I'm aware of it now. And so I'm thinking of it more in terms of like patting myself on the back, because you know what, for that word in particular, I've evolved so far from my original experience of it that I forgot that meaning existed, and I have this newfound meaning for it, and I just see that, and I think that's a really cool thing, and I wasn't even aware of that I'd got to that. So I just wanted to share that. But I am curious, in closing statements, if anybody has had any kind of insight shifting, something shifting for them that they want to share tonight with us? Or it's night everywhere. That's, I mean, in this moment, let's go with that.
Yeah.
Yes. So I just realized, sorry, Akilah. Yeah.
Anyone want to unmute and share? Can you clarify? Oh, I think that's for the chat specifically. Yeah.
Okay.
I think for me, it was actually the link between community and responsibility. Because if you, yeah, I never thought, oh, yeah, I'm living in that community, but there is something else. There is that exchange of something that I didn't really know how, and that is responsibility towards that community, I guess. There will be more things, but that's one that I have added on today.
Yeah, ecology of accountability. Kezia's, I made a note of that, Akilah, as you was talking about it, because that really comes into what makes communities function or dysfunction as well. Yeah. Anything else?
I was just going to say that question, do you feel your own value in upholding that community? I'm just really going to think about that quite a bit, because I do realize that in some of the communities where I feel maybe don't feel that, it's where I don't feel known. You know, I don't feel like we all, I just think that's such a huge part of community, is that feeling of significance, like what you are bringing to the group and knowing what other people are bringing to the group, and having that knowledge of each other seems essential to me in being able to answer that question. Do I feel my own value in upholding that community, and then in turn that responsibility? So that's just something I'm going to sit with for a while.
I should make a note of it.
Thanks, Kate. Aslam, please go ahead.
For me, it has been a very nice discussion. I mean, I really understand what is meant with responsibility here, but in a way, I was so triggered with the word that I needed to discuss it here. So now I got things in my backpack to carry on. That one of the things is willingness to give up, and this is also, I think, it's also related with responsibility, because when you are not judged, and if the community is open to or flexible to understand why you haven't actualized that responsibility, for example, then it's a kind of understanding community, and that values everyone inside. And when you are willing to give up just because of the other person is not comfortable with that, so it's a kind of supporting system. So thank you for sharing all these kind of things and for the discussion.
So good. So it feels really, this has been really useful for me for sure. You know, again, these are things that I'm constantly working and that are constantly working me. And I also, it reminds me of the ways that community can be also a drop-in, you know, like it isn't always 17 meetings or a year-long thing, because this for me was, we were in community, you know, and one of the characteristics of it for me is that there are always things that I can take with me, and I hope to leave things in community as well, like to leave something of value there. And for sure, we will integrate a lot of the things that are even in the chat here in that thing that we mentioned that we'll share with you after, that page that has the vocabulary terms, a lot of the ones that came up here, because we really feel that a huge part of how we sustain this sort of liberation work is in the ways that we learn to share meaning, which doesn't necessarily mean we all think the same thing, but we can share in the exploration of things together, and that we are deliberate about that, and that we understand ourselves from multiple perspectives, someone who can be triggered and someone who can be triggering. So I'm really grateful for the variety of ways that community happens, and this has felt like one too. And we're hoping that the language here, some of the words and some of the ways that we've really played with them can be useful for you as you continue to be part of other communities, and even that community of self, personal leadership. We didn't talk a lot about that, but that's a huge element of how we commune, our personal leadership work. So thank y'all for being here and really showing up. And thank you for letting it be a space where no one seemed to be trying to make anyone else show up differently than however the hell we wanted to. That's a big sign of community for me too.
Yes.
Yeah. So thank y'all for that. That's it from me. Anyone else want to say anything as we close out, or offer anything either to the group or for this document that we'll share after? Please unmute and go if you do want to.
I always count to 10 in case somebody's trying to speak, but they can't find their unmute button. So hence, yeah, I just also want to say thank you so much for all of you that showed up. And I love coming to something and leaving where I have more to take, so much more to take with than what I brought. And this was definitely one of those days. And yeah, that's how I'm spending my Friday evening now, thinking about what happened. This conversation. So yeah, thank you from my side so much.
So yeah, we will share this document with the Summerhill folks so that everyone can get it. Wishing you so much peace and love as you continue in this journey. It's never not beautifully overwhelming to me that we continue to have communities of folks who come together around the rights of young people, and the commitment to contributing to that work, that young people can be free to live in ways that allow them to thrive and that re-educate us as adults. So it's so good to know you, truly, for all those reasons and all those ways. So much love and peace to y'all. All right.
Bye, everybody.